Thank you for joining Perrin's webinar, Cyber Armageggon Threats, Vulnerabilities, and Liability Trends. We'd like to thank our speakers for putting together this informative presentation and FIPS Reporting for handling the technology components of this webinar. If you are seeking CLE credits, please make note of the 2 CLE codes that will be recited during the webinar. At the conclusion of the webinar, we will email an evaluation to all registered attendees. Please include the 2 CLE codes on the evaluation and the CLE state you are seeking credit for. At this point, I'd like to hand it off to Beth to introduce the speakers.
Thank you, Beth. Beth and Beth. So it's hello from cyber lawyers to all of you in cyberspace. Let me first introduce our panel. Starting at the very far end is John Fleming. He is the CEO of Ridge Global, and if you've been to London, we were in London, and the talk of town, Lloyd's of London, is all about cyber. That's all you hear, but what you're really hearing is what Ridge Global is doing. They are innovative and providing products that are unique in the cyber insurance market. Next to John is Betsy Woutenberg. She is the CEO of Intelligence Arts. This is a consulting company. She consults with companies on cyber threats and vulnerabilities and how to mitigate those. Next to me is Ted Schaer. He is a shareholder in Zarwin Baum. They have offices in Pennsylvania.
And New Jersey.
New Jersey and the third
Delaware.
Delaware, thank you. Right. More importantly, Ted Schaer has been practicing law for 30 years. He's probably one of the premier trial lawyers in the United States. So how does a trial lawyer end up being cyber counsel? He and I have a similar story in that one of our clients asked us both to become certified in privacy. And so we took basically a bar exam.
That's true.
Yeah, it was tough. So my name is Beth Fitch. I'm from Arizona. Similar story to Dad. We took the exam, got certified, and have been pioneering in this area ever since. So we're here to talk to you about trends. So we're going to talk about external threats, business vulnerabilities, legal liabilities, insurance coverages, and risk mitigation. So let's start with trends. Let's start with some disturbing trends. Ted.
Good afternoon. You cannot pick up the newspaper today or turn on your news stations without hearing about nation states and transnational crimes, whether it is cyber activists and cyber hacktivists from the Soviet Union, North Korea, or ISIS. There is a real and serious threat to trade secrets and to the security of this country and to corporate assets and assets of law firms and businesses alike of nation states trying to either obtain confidential information or disrupt systems and businesses. Another disturbing trend is hackers targeting executives and their families. Many of you have heard of the term phishing. Today, it is becoming an exercise for hackers to learn about executives, to obtain information about them on social media, and to go after them and their families directly once they have that information. And of course, another area is hackers regulating small and medium business enterprises. Hackers do understand that small and medium businesses do not have the assets, do not have the capabilities that large corporations do in building data privacy and security, and they realize where the vulnerabilities are, and regulators today realize the same thing. So if you're a small or you're a medium business enterprise, you're being targeted. It's just not the big boys anymore. It's everybody.
To that I want to add, I'm Betsy Woutenberg. I'm very sort of growingly impressed and frightened also by the level of effort and expertise that hackers are developing in going after their targets. Specifically, they are doing a lot of research to understand you and your company, what your interests are, who your business partners are, what your business activities are, in order to craft their attacks against you. This shows up largely in social engineering with well-crafted email approaches that are working again and again. The stakes are high, and hackers are investing more time and energy into understanding that. It makes it harder for us to avoid making the mistake of letting a hacker into our system.
And if you look at it in terms of the average discovery date, it's a problem. This is a problem that cannot be contained. The cyber threat is real. It's uncontainable. And when you say, why does it take 300 days or does it take 6 months to learn about an intrusion? Look at an example of a client that we had, 4,500 employees, 8,000 endpoints or processing. In a weekly basis, they were getting almost 17,000 alerts. Of those 17,000 alerts, 19% were reliable, but only 4 were really acted upon, 4%, just because of the sheer volume of alerts that are coming through. And it gives it time. You're looking at the average in the financial institutions, around 3 months. In the retail, 6 months. And you're going to see this discovery period become elongated as the attacks occur more and more. The volume, this threat, it is cyber warfare today. It is just not the threat. The threat's evolving, and it's actually warfare, and it's going to change the method of how we run small businesses in the United States.
So Betsy, talk to us a little bit about the threats and tactics that we're seeing.
This diagram is meant to show you sort of 3 of the key cyber adversaries out there and what they have in common and how they differ. We're going to talk about hacktivists, who are hackers who are motivated by political or ideological issues. They are anti-government, they're anti-oil and gas companies, they're anti-US, whatever it happens to be, but they have an idea that motivates them. We also look at cyber criminals who are driven by financial interests. Literally, they want a return on investment from their time and energy spent doing their operations. And thirdly, state-sponsored attackers. These are the large sort of government-sponsored groups that we see: China, Russia, and others, North Korea, and others that are out there conducting cyber operations in cyberspace. What they have in common is what's in the middle: bad things in, good things out. Their objective is to insert code to gain a capability to bring out from your network information assets of use to them. But their methods differ depending on the resources that they have. For example, the hacktivists that we see a lot of times do defacement attacks or DDoS attacks, a distributed denial of service attack, which is intended to cripple or degrade or embarrass you. Their objectives often are to bring information out into the public, to prove a point, to reveal a wrong, that kind of thing. Cyber criminals, however, are interested more in financial return. They want to monetize their activities. They're looking at credit card numbers, information for healthcare fraud, pharmaceutical fraud, all those kinds of things. So they're looking for a way to pull out and monetize as quickly as they can what their cyber operation is. We also have state-sponsored attackers that are, again, motivated by long-term strategic interests. The United States, for example, has been targeted for many years by China for military information on planes and missiles and submarines. That's broadened out into commercial information inside, intellectual property, those kinds of things that Chinese state-owned enterprises can use and to be more competitive globally. So again, the level of attack that you get sort of equates to the level of resources that each of these groups have. Hacktivists tend to be low-resourced. State-sponsored attackers are the most highly resourced. Cyber criminals are kind of in the middle, but they're getting better and better. So go ahead.
Yeah, Betsy, I've heard recently that the activity level or the threat level by the Chinese has diminished a little bit. Is there any truth to that?
Well, it's only what we're seeing. So again, the information is always only partial. We're only ever getting a partial picture. It appears to be that the U.S. efforts to pursue criminal cases against hackers in the foreign field for the activities in the U.S. are causing some criminals to slow down and pull back, and state-sponsored actors are pulling back a little bit. But it remains to be seen what happens. There's also other factors that are affecting China's cyber activity. Their economy is changing. Their goals are changing. There are many factors. But yes, we have seen a downtick in activity. However, it could be that they're simply shifting to other tactics that we aren't seeing as clearly.
So Betsy, talk a little bit about the Ashley Madison. Everyone knows about Ashley Madison. I mean, that went from cyber to hacktivists in some sense.
Well, it's unclear. The Ashley Madison incident is, of course, a website for adult users for relationships, and they were hacked, and their customer base was completely revealed. And again, Ashley Madison was purporting to be for people to have affairs. So there's a bit of an ethical issue there.
I see there's probably like 9 people listening right now that are running to the computer to check to make sure that their name is
AshleyMadison.com.
Right.
Yeah. So when this information was revealed, the hacker claimed that they were punishing the website for essentially enabling unethical behavior, to enable people to cheat on their significant others. It remains to be seen. The rumors are that really there was an extortion attempt that went wrong. Ashley Madison was not responding or didn't want to play ball when the hackers got in, threatened them that they would release information. Ashley Madison did not deliver on the ransom, and the hackers made their threat good and released it. And there have been other instances of hackers releasing information that was likely the consequence of an extortion demand that was not fulfilled.
Much like Sony.
Yes,
they're
exactly.
getting very embarrassing information.
Yes. So the hacker claims a rationale of serving the public good, an ideology to reveal what's an unethical website, but in reality, there's probably a bit more going on, more monetary there.
So let's go to what's going on now.
Sure. We're going to show you a FireEye map of activity that's going on out there. These maps are interesting to watch. FireEye is not the only company that does this. FireEye is a great cybersecurity company, and what they have deployed is to watch and characterize internet traffic and try to identify items in that traffic that could indicate a hostile attack going on. The reality is it's actually kind of pretty difficult to see what's hostile and what's not. FireEye is trying to flag for us what looks like a real APT, meaning a sophisticated attack. But what I want to get across to you is that there's constant attacks going on, constant attempts going on out there. Not all of this traffic is an actual attack. A lot of the figures that we see about cyber attacks are a mix of actual purposeful attacks and kind of exploratory probes. The problem for us is simply by being businesses in the business world with a web presence, with an email server of some kind, we become part of this. We also are being probed all the time. And so you can no longer say, well, my business, I don't have an internet business. We're simply a law firm with an internet site. So that, we're not a target. Well, your gear is making you a target, and a lot of attacks begin by technical probes, escalating into spear phishing attacks, but it begins here. So this map, it's kind of fun to watch. Again, not everything on there is bad. Some of it definitely is. A lot of it's just sniffing and probing, and the key to remember is you're a part of this. We're all a part of this simply by being members of the business community with internet equipment out there. We are also being probed all the time. Hackers are always looking at us to see, what do we have? How can they get in? Is it worth it to them to go after us? So it's useful to see that.
So Ted, talk about the crown jewels or what the hackers are after.
Well, for those people that are really just learning about cybersecurity and data security, what's important to understand is what we're really talking about is privacy. We're talking about keeping private information that hackers, and what Betsy just explained, people that are cyber criminals are trying to access your information. So it falls under the umbrella of privacy. When we talk about the information that people are seeking through cyber attacks and what happens in a data breach, is people are trying to obtain the crown jewels of information. And in front of you, you see a screen which lays out what are commonly understood to be the crown jewels. First, personally identifiable information, social security numbers, financial and payroll data. This is what cyber criminals and hacktivists want to obtain in order to commit crimes. They want to take that information and turn that into data in order to seek billing information, in order to obtain credit cards, in order to seek loans, in order really to steal your identity. And that's why it's so important that we protect our identity and we protect things like our social security number. PHI, protected healthcare information. Another crown jewel for cyber criminals looking to obtain information on you and your clients, including, and your employees, right? If you're a business, if you're a law firm, if you're an insurance company, if you're anybody, if your employees have healthcare information and you maintain it, and certainly any medical facility, any hospital, anybody in the medical business at all, if you've got information involving people's date of birth, if they obtain information involving insurance information, what healthcare insurance information you have, what ID numbers, group ID numbers. What we're seeing is cyber criminals going out and starting their own physical therapy centers, taking this information and billing insurance companies for services that were never obtained and were never given, phony therapy centers. And 6 months later, somebody at Blue Cross Blue Shield or Aetna gets a phone call from a subscriber when they get their EOB, and the subscriber says, I've never treated at the ABC Therapy Center. Millions and millions of dollars are going out of the economy people's identity is being ruined. That's why it's so important that businesses look to see what information and what crown jewels they have. Betsy.
I want to add one thing here. It's interesting to understand how this actually works. The hacker who steals the information may not be the criminal who actually uses it.
Sure.
The hacker takes his, hacks the company, takes information, posts it, and resells it to a middleman who then concatenates information and posts it on his website and sells it to a criminal who is not a hacker, whose job it is to go after and set up the mechanism to actually monetize it. So there are many levels here of use, which is why there's a constant voracious appetite for the information, because it gets posted and resold. It'll be stolen even before there's someone to buy it. So information is very, very valuable, and there's a whole complex economy built up around criminal information reselling.
Ted, are you saying in the trend in terms of, it seems like there's more and more every day in the paper about ransomware, about for medical records, et cetera, hospitals, et cetera. Do you see that as a more focused trend over the PII and then everybody going after the PHI?
Listen, what we see is just a continued escalation of cyber crime because it pays. The days of having to go into a bank with a mask and carry a gun are over. You need to sit behind a computer and you could obtain this information. One of the things that I want to pick up that Betsy spoke about is we're seeing the franchising of cyber criminal activity. As Betsy said, we're seeing people that are setting up these enterprises. They're going out. They're not necessarily utilizing the cards themselves, but they're selling their services, and they're saying, here, we're going to go out and do this, and by the way, what would you like us to do? And then they're going in and they're taking orders, and they're saying, oh, you need PHI, great. Well, we've got some probes into this healthcare system. How many records would you like?
So it's kind of impressive.
Yeah, well,
they're pretty good.
Capitalism and entrepreneurialism is transcending the globe in the worst possible way. Another area that, of course, is a gold mine for criminals is PCI, or payment card industry data, your credit card information. You do not have to go very far on the internet and punch in. I think if you punch in CC dumps on the internet, you will see any kind of credit card in the world, from a Black American Express card to a basic Visa card, that you can buy from anywhere to $50 to $100 with a $1,000 credit limit on it. And if it doesn't work, these folks will even guarantee your money back. And it is just that easy. By the way, I'm not suggesting that anybody listening to this webinar do that. That would be a crime, I assure you. But it's out there. And of course, the Internet of Things. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But what in front of you really are the four main areas of data that cyber criminals are looking to obtain, and this is your crown jewels if you're a business. This is what you need to work with your IT folks and with your consultants in order to make sure that you are protecting this information, because this is what's vulnerable and this is what they want.
So I think the statistic, 1 in 3 Americans are affected. I mean, we used to say that the avalanche is coming, but the avalanche is here. And I saw another figure, the value of health information is $363 per record. That's what the going rate is now. So no wonder they're interested in it. So tell us about the Internet of Things.
Sure, many people are familiar with the term IoT, or the Internet of Things. And over the years, what has happened is that we have developed connectivity between devices and systems and smartphones in every industry, whether it's utilities or healthcare or finances, banking, and everything has become very connected. I mean, you can go to the store and you can buy a monitor for your baby, and you can be down the block and watch your child sleeping in their bedroom. So many people have the Nest and other devices to monitor their home thermometers. Well, that's great, and smartphones and Fitbits, and these are all connected by the Internet of Things, which is connected via the cloud and through systems. The problem is that these wonderful devices were not meant for the type of security breaches that are now occurring, and information that people otherwise think is private is becoming exposed. It's a very well-known story of just local criminals who are driving down the streets and checking people's thermometers to see who turns down their thermometer at 8:30 in the morning and who turns it back up at 4:30 before they get home. Criminals understand that that type of manipulation means that somebody's not home, and it exposes families and businesses to threats and security that no one ever thought about when this information was first devised. Betsy can talk about this, but one of the stories that came out last year is a frightening story about a utility in New York that was connected via the internet. Betsy, can you talk a little bit about the dam?
Oh my goodness! Well, there has been quite a bit of probes of the internet from adversaries into U.S. critical infrastructure. And in that case, there's evidence that some Iranian hackers were attempting to look around at U.S. dams and other facilities. This was sort of kept classified for a while, but was sort of announced in public last year as a means to kind of help people pay more attention to this. There is a great deal of critical industrial infrastructure around our country and around the world that was built to a different model where devices, communicate directly to each other. They don't have encrypted traffic. There's a perimeter security model, but not an element level security model, meaning once you're in, you're good to go. There's no more security challenges that you have to confront. So a great deal of our critical infrastructure devices are not designed with the kind of protections that we would expect elsewhere. These devices are essentially Internet of Things devices. They're individual devices performing functions that they're essentially mini computers that can be configured on the fly over the air to do things, meaning that the device you have that you're looking at can actually do a great many more things than you can. It's simply been configured to do this, and it can be reconfigured. And these devices are often internet-facing. They have to have some kind of connectivity in order to function. So it's very difficult to retroactively fit better security into these models because the technology these are old facilities. They've been around for decades, and it's very difficult to bring them up to the current model of security.
So really, the cyber threat is changing daily, and these current solutions have to also change, which I think is the greatest challenge that we face in this space.
Absolutely. You need to take a look at yourself as an attacker would and realize what you represent. You think your company is simply a law firm or a school or something. In reality, you are a collection of value assets that someone else is evaluating and deciding, is it worth it? Is it worth it to them to go after you? And the bigger you are, the more stuff you are, the more active you are, the more money you're handling, the more clients you have, the more customers you have, you increase your attractiveness to these attackers. And again, it's you have to understand their mindset and how they see you.
So John, let's talk a little bit about the numbers. What are the numbers?
Yeah, the numbers are really changing. From
the numbers. There we go. We got the numbers. There we go.
Technology.
Tell us about the numbers.
Yeah, 2015 numbers are changing every day as there's more data collection, from the insurance industry as well as from the different business sectors there. So you're looking at the average settlements around 733, and that changes. Larger corporations over $1 billion in revenues, when they do have a breach, average payments around 2.9 million for stats. And in the healthcare side, again, we talked about PHI, it's about 1.3 million in terms of your average payments. You're seeing legal costs has gone up since 2014. Proactive, coach management. There's a little question in terms of classification of legal as well as crisis management. So you saw a movement of that up from like 450 in 2014 to almost $700,000 in 15. And the real question of that is what part of the legal is really public relations when you're strategizing with your breach coach counsel. And it's moving up because there's one thing that the industry has done is engage counsel early, which I think privacy as attorney work client product increases is one of the reasons driving that up, and again having an impact with regard to average payments on that. Crisis service, is one of the key components of why you buy cyber. It's reputational harm, and you'll see that payment has moved up about $100,000 over 2014 results. So that's the key. That reputational harm and getting you back online and back on business. So you're going to see this number continue to escalate. You're going to see an increase in terms of the defense containment cost expenses. as more and more reporting becomes accurate and comes in.
John, the numbers that we are putting up there now are for reported breaches, right?
That's for reported breaches, and there's a couple of sources that we've had, and they're, coming in from public sector, net due diligence, Price Waterhouse, other, reliable sources, but it's not a mandated reporting yet. And where you see, like over in Europe, where you have the ICO requires mandated reporting, and I think the U.S., as you'll get into talking about some of the cases later, we're going to wind up having a mandated reporting of all breaches, whether or not the records have in fact been compromised or not. So I think you're going to see this number. My forecast in 16, 20 to 25% upward swing.
It's like on the average payout. I mean, that's what, if you're a smaller enterprise, that's what you really need to be looking at in terms of exposure.
Yeah,
and encompasses all of it.
You're right, Beth. The question is, can a small company sustain $1 million loss? No.
Right.
And when you look at small companies, there are those companies that have about 250 employees. So you're really looking for that risk transfer by buying an insurance policy and, being collaborative with your retail broker in terms of what will suit your needs for your particular industry sector, and your operating platform is very, very important.
John, do you see, I know that you feel that in 2016 those numbers are going to start increasing. Do you see a corresponding increase in a hardening in the insurance market for businesses?
Not yet. We, plenty of capacity in the U.S. There's it's either between 50 to 60 active markets. So there's an availability of capital at this time. Some questions and legal development. I want to ask you about Neiman Marcus later on. Where that's going to go. That could really change. The impact in terms of frequency and the severity of claims, especially on the class action side.
Let's talk about by industry then. What's going on?
When you look at the industry, that healthcare is the target, and they're facing multiple system legacy issues. So you see them, around 16% of all the claims. Then you move on to education. It's usually the higher education. It's an open forum. It's an open environment. Multiple platforms in terms of availability of information. That's really going. Government, prime target. State sponsor, seems like, OPM breach with the Chinese. I forget what that final record count is, 50 million or 60 million records of our people. Keeps on going on. And then you see, in terms of financial institutions, the banking, we're seeing a fair amount of activity with regard to credit unions and other, smaller facilities. And again, there's a focus, it seems, more on the smaller entities all of a sudden. And then if you combine hospitality and retail, that's really your point of sales transaction. That's more PII, and that's rounding it off. And then you have this all other, which is anything in this sector. But you're going to continue to see that focus on the healthcare, higher education. We're seeing a tick up in requests for coverages in higher education. And we're seeing some firming, Ted, not a lot, just a slight indication of firming in higher education premiums.
And what this tells me is that no industry is impervious to attacks. I mean, that's what it's telling me. So, John, let's talk about the vulnerabilities by data. Let's talk about breaches by type of data.
Sure. If you look at it, it's, the real side is on the financial institution side, that PII. It's really vulnerability of the data. We're still seeing a fair amount of folks in the retail sector that have open endpoints. So at that point of transaction, or at point of sale, non-encrypted transactions still going on this day and age. So you would see that as the real, driver. And they're trying to catch up. The hackers are definitely in front of us, in the industry sector, and that's really driving it. Then you see in your personal privacy, you're talking about profiling and doing research in terms of execs, et cetera. We're seeing more and more of that. We're seeing from the corporate side asking, what's my protection of that if I'm a CEO and that my information has been compromised at my work? How do I protect myself in that regard?
Let's go to vulnerabilities. I mean, Betsy, why don't you talk about that?
My favorite thing to talk about. This is a diagram meant to show you sort of what we're seeing that's actually causing some of these data breaches that are out there. And just at a glance, you see almost sort of three almost equal pie pieces here. 37% malicious attacks, meaning some outside person purposely going after some kind of data asset with focus and drive and purpose. But also 35% negligence human factor, which means losing laptops, leaving them unprotected. The causative event was an employee or a person who by accident or presumably unintentionally made the breach possible. And then the third piece is system glitches, technology that has failed, firewalls that weren't configured, where data was presumed to be leaked. There are a lot of stories of information found on servers that is public facing. You must assume that because that server was unprotected to the internet, exposed for 6 months, that information has been compromised, even if you can't prove it. That's a system glitch. The takeaway here is that your strategy must encompass all three of these pieces, because these are the three things that happen again and again. You need to think about malicious attacks, which gets all the attention, right? All the hackers and all this bad stuff. But the reality is, just as often, it's negligence human factor stuff. Training, device accountability, knowing what your stuff is, making sure you are tracking this stuff. And then thirdly, system glitches, which is simply taking care of your stuff, making sure that your servers are locked down and patched. So your strategy needs to touch on all three of these pieces, because they're all equally important, the data shows in breaches.
Actually, I was reading this morning just about Snapshot and some of the things about it seems like everybody is drowning in the email phishing. And it just seems like every day I read about it. W-2 information, payroll information coming through. And I see about 35%. What's your forecast? Do you think that's going to increase up to 60%? Because we're seeing so much of the email, even in our office, we see email, very disguised emails from FedEx, from a package, from someone that we actually go with. I go, oh my God. But I know he never sends us anything FedEx, but it sends us to UPS. And it just seems like the negligent or human factor side is really going to explode. Here
is the thing. You mentioned this before. You're seeing more and more small businesses being targeted. That's an indicator that the cyber sort of attack and criminal market is actually maturing. And what that means is that there are more and more ways for your average low-level criminal to make money at this. It used to be, if you wanted to steal a bunch of credit cards, you had to know people who could actually monetize that. You had to know the people who would buy them from you. You had to know them personally. Now, it's like eBay for credit card numbers out there. I could set up shop in a couple hours and be out there buying and selling credit card numbers if I wanted to. It's easy. What that means is that activity is no longer the level of the good hackers. It's filtering down to any old hacker can do this. Any old small criminal can do this. And they also are now looking at smaller and smaller targets, because for them it's almost like a hobby. They're just trying whatever works. So we are all getting inundated at higher and higher amounts of these sort of explorational spear phishing stuff. But the thing is, they're also getting better. So remember, a few years ago you would get the misspelled, bad English. It's fairly obvious this is phishing. Now there are templates. There are Word docs. They go to your website and they copy language from your website and repeat it back to you in the email. This is easy. It's not that difficult to do this stuff. So yes, I do expect those numbers to increase, because the cost of doing it to the attacker is dropping so precipitously. It's no longer hard or expensive for them. Therefore, we're also seeing a higher volume.
I think it's important just to add two things. First of all, while this is certainly a cyber seminar, and while we're certainly talking about data and data stored electronically, make no mistake about it, we're also talking about paper records here. There have been many, many cases involving breaches where there was negligence in disposal of paper records for employees and for patients at hospitals and patients at doctors. So leaving records available on your desk, keeping PII and PHI in unlocked records in your controller's office or on your secretary's desks, folks, that is a data breach, just a data breach of paper, and that is negligence. So when we talk about human factor negligence, the simplest thing, like locking up that information and making sure that the cleaning person who comes to your office doesn't pick up a stack of records and take them to the Xerox room while they're cleaning your office, equally as important. And one other thing I think that's very important to add here is social media. All of us are consumed with Facebook, with Twitter, with Instagram. We're all sharing our lives on the internet and telling everybody about ourselves. Well, guess what? And Betsy, I'd like you to address that because I know you do. And if you could explain threat modeling, what happens when we put all that information out there on all these social media sites? How does that affect the hacking?
Two things. One, it makes it easier for hackers to decide whether it's worth going after you because they can understand more about what your business is. Do you have high value clients? Are you handling major transactions? Are you operating? They can learn more about you, which helps them decide whether it's worth it to go after you. And secondly, it makes that attack easier. We see again and again that spear phishing. A spear phish is an email that's been carefully crafted to try to lure you as a user into opening a malicious document or clicking a link or visiting a bad website. And they are more successful at that when they can craft that email to appeal to you personally, addressing you by name, referring to companies that you know, talking about business activity that you've done. CEO impersonation relies heavily on that, where CEO impersonation again is this type of fraud. It's a type of fraud where you will receive an email from someone you think is a CEO of your company, addressing you by name, sounding kind of like the CEO, referring to a business trip he's on, saying, I'm traveling in China right now. I need you to transfer money to this Chinese company for me because we're going to buy them. Don't tell anybody. This is a secret thing, but just real fast, send about $10 million to China. And so you think, well, this is my CEO giving me a direct order. Do you go ahead and do it? Do you want to, and again, many folks have, many banks and companies have actually transferred money based on a single email or a couple emails that purport to be from the CEO. And they work because the hacker, the fraudster on the other end, knows how to sound like that CEO very effectively. And that information comes from what companies are broadcasting. The name of the CEO, the email addresses, where they're traveling, who they're doing business with, what type of business they're doing. All that information helps these hackers to be more effective when they come after you, whether it's a spear phishing email or a phone call, whatever it happens to be. So as we've all become internet-enabled businesses, with our Twitter accounts and our social media for our companies and trying to popularize our business and get out there and be more known, that comes back at us by fraudsters who use that to target us and to be more effective in the attacks that they're doing.
So what you're talking about really is social engineering.
Yes.
So why don't you comment on that?
Sure. Social engineering is a catch-all term for a variety of techniques that hackers are using to manipulate human behavior and attitudes to make their attacks more effective. I mean, their objective is always to get into your company. You're not the target. I mean, they don't really care about you. They want to get through you to what you have and what your company has. And social engineering is a catch-all term for the techniques they use to do that. To go after that, and again, we've mentioned spear phishing, which is using emails, but there's other. There's also voice phishing. There are voice phone calls that can happen. It's a variety of tactics and techniques, but it comes down to con men. These cons are not new. Social engineering is not a new thing. It's a new platform for old techniques of manipulation and control that people have fallen for hundreds of years. So it looks and feels new, but the forces behind it are very old and very effective.
So let's talk about trends. What are you seeing in terms of vulnerability trends?
Sure. And again, to be clear, this slide is a list of don'ts. So this is not a list of do's. This is a list of don'ts. These are vulnerabilities that I am seeing again and again in companies that are leading to greater breaches, more frequent and more severe breaches. So to be clear, I think of them in terms of there's technical exposures as well as human exposures. Technical exposures are about the network and the equipment. Human exposures are about people's behavior and training. Technical exposures, number one, practicing poor cyber hygiene. Cyber hygiene is the term for taking care of the stuff you have. When you adopt a dog, you got to walk the dog, you got to clean up, you got to feed the dog, you got to water the dog, or the dog's not going to do so well. Same thing with your internet stuff. If you buy all these fancy firewalls and things, if you don't actually maintain them, their effectiveness really, really drops off. And in many of the successful attacks that we've seen, it's because companies bought and set up good security systems, but then forgot or were not diligent about keeping them up to date. So, and then a year later, an attack that they should have been able to repel was able to get through because their firewall simply wasn't up to date. Cyber hygiene is the ritual of going through and every month, every week, even every day, checking to make sure that your technical gear is properly maintained. Again, another issue of remote access. When you have employees working remotely, you really need to make those connections secure using VPNs. Like a virtual private network, which is an encrypted channel to talk. So when you're working from home, your traffic to your company is encrypted and protected. Companies that don't do that are at greater risk of breaches. Companies that aren't tracking laptops and smartphones and all those kinds of things, that don't track them and make their employees accountable for them and make sure they know where they are and that they're updated also is a significant issue. And then companies that disdain multi-factor authentication. That's a fancy term for requiring sort of a couple of independent checks before a user is given access to sensitive information, multiple checks to make sure that user is actually the right person.
Betsy, could you give the audience your advice? Is password 123 a good authentication password for people, or perhaps should they do something a little bit more serious?
Yes. The passwords are falling out of favor as a good sustainable security element because it's just so difficult to remember them. There are, in fact, lists of common passwords available to the criminals that they can use to check. So when they're trying to bang away at your email, they try these first 100,000 commonly used passwords. And, a lot of times your password may be on the 100,000 list. You really need to take your passwords seriously. Use a password manager. Use truly strong passwords that look like garbage and gobbledygook. Because again, all the good ones are already being tried and used against you.
There's 4 people right now on Google saying top 100,000 passwords.
Yes,
Please do not do that.
I'm telling you, out there.
We are not asking you. We are telling you not to do that. That would be a bad thing.
So again, all you companies out there, if you have multi-factor authentication available to protect your email access for employees, please implement that because it's really, really effective. On the human side, companies that give broad access to all their employees for network access, and law firms with paralegals are notorious for this. They for their pool of paralegals, they will give every paralegal access to every lawyer's working case files because, practically speaking, paralegals switch out a lot. So sometimes you may have this person helping, next day this person. So it makes sense that all these paralegals would have access to everything. As a hacker, that means if I can get one paralegal to slip up, I got the keys to everything in the firm. So that's the risk. It's a case where sort of our business realities are creating a serious security vulnerability. So the answer for that is to wrap those paralegals in better security, support them with better technical security to offset that human risk, or again, be more selective with how you actually allocate that access. So. Secondly, another issue that we see that is bad is companies that bend their security rules for executives. They kind of exempt the CEO from having to follow all these persnickety security rules because he's too busy and important to pay attention to this stuff. He's the one that hackers are going after. And it also sets a bad tone for the rest of the company. Like, if he's not doing it, why should I do it? And security begins to erode. People stop paying attention, stop believing in it. So you got to be consistent across the company. Another thing that companies are doing wrong, and particularly is single-factor approvals for wire transfers. Again and again and again. Again, that email comes in from the CEO in China wanting $10 million. If that goes to the CFO, who has sole approval power to send that wire transfer, that transfer may happen without any double checks, any verification, nothing like that. So what should happen? That CFO should be required to double check with another person, with the bank, with the CEO by voice, some more complex and rigorous process to reduce the likelihood that a single person could be fooled, manipulated into letting that money go. And lastly, again, as you touched on, we as companies are leaking information all the time. We are making it easier for hackers to understand who we are, what our names are, what our phone numbers are, what our email addresses are, because we put it out there in public. Be careful about that. I know in this day and age you have to publicize your successes. You want to talk about what your business is out there and doing, but realize that information can, again, be turned around to come back at you. It doesn't mean you have to stop, but it means realize that if you're broadcasting this stuff, wrap yourselves in better security to counteract that.
what I'm hearing is really more informed cyber risk management. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Why, yes, John, that is in fact what I'm saying. So yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Shameless self-promotion for
Right.
our best.
That is true. There's good reasons for this stuff.
John, but you raise a great issue. I mean, you're on the insurance side. You're looking at underwriting applications all the time. And when you see companies that are practicing good cyber hygiene, I mean, how much does that go into your decision making on pricing and policy and whether you want to write the risk and if you could talk to our audience about, I mean, how insurance companies, how deep are they looking?
Good point, Ted. We look at it, we're always looking at someone's providing what we call live risk management. Do they have the management protocols and procedures? And is it actually followed? Can you actually document that through the human factor by the observation of it? And then on the technical side, you have your technologist saying, do you have the best perimeter defenses or intrusion defenses? And then what are you doing to monitor your network? So we look at that as the first criteria for a Ridge Global client. Are they active in the space, or are they just looking for a risk transfer? So just to push off all that responsibility into the insurance product. So we're looking at what, the whole exposure base is what we're looking at. And we're looking at upfront is most important, is that protocol and procedures. As you say, the cyber hygiene, very critical for us. So we see that they have it in place and it's actually being utilized. We looked at that as a preferred account, and there's pricing differential. It's, it can go anywhere from 5 to 25% on the nature of the risks, and then also as to the ongoing monitoring of the system. It's so key for us. And it's a couple of things we're saying. Just the access is really a concern. We really see that third-party vendor access to a system, in particular to law firms that we're looking at. It's very open exposure. It's what we call an open endpoint. And what we're looking at is, with the counts that are really focused on the endpoint processing is a ideal client that we like to focus on, because they're responding proactively to the evolving threat or the new threats that are coming out there.
And how about clients that they get the application in and they hand it off to their IT person, or if it's a smaller business, whoever is assigned it, and they're making these representations about what their company is doing, like Betsy had mentioned, updating firewalls. Well, I mean, what happens when a company makes these representations and warranties about their company and a claim comes in? What are insurance companies looking at when it comes to evaluating that claim?
Well, the application does require that.
Oh, yeah,
every
our application is incorporated
Right.
into the policy as a representation of the risk, because we want to know what the risk is. And you've seen that in the CNA case out in California, saying, hey, you said you're going to maintain your intrusion software. You didn't. And that's the subject of litigation as we speak. But I think you're going to see more and more carriers saying, if we relied upon your representation to issue this policy and take this financial transfer, we expect you to be honorable and give that. So I think that's an area of more litigation to come.
We're going to shift gears to legal trends. So thank you for that segue. But before we do, a very important announcement. Pay attention, everyone. I am going to announce the first of the two CLE codes. The first code is Perrin 200, Perrin 200. Okay, so you see, I know you're not paying attention. Somebody so again,
And you get password.
the first CLE code is Perrin 200. All right, so let's talk about legislating the issue. Everyone across the board is very active in legislating this issue. Privacy has become foremost to virtually every legislative body that's out there right now. So just briefly touching on international, what's important to know is that privacy is a fundamental human right in other countries. It is not so in the United States. So if you are operating internationally and you're complying with USA codes, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're complying internationally. In terms of the United States, the federal government is also very active. I've just put up just a selection of a few statutes. HIPAA obviously applies to healthcare, the FCRA and FACTA, those are credit reporting statutes. FERPA is education. Graham-Leach-Biley is the financial sector. And then the latest and the greatest is the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act. There's mixed reviews on whether that's going to have any success or not. What it is that the government is asking businesses to voluntarily share breach information in exchange for immunity. Most companies are saying, well, we're not going to do that, so it may have no teeth whatsoever. Play out, we'll find out. The executive branch has gotten very, very active. Ted mentioned a minute ago about the regulatory agencies are really pursuing any and all. It's not just the big boys anymore. Little entities are being highly regulated, and enforcement actions are being brought against them. The FTC is emboldened at this point because of a recent ruling by the court that said that they can bring regulatory actions and can levy fines. The Office of Civil Rights, same thing happened recently. The Office of Civil Rights regulates healthcare and education. And I saw just yesterday that in 2016, so far to date, $8.6 million in fines have been levied as a result of HIPAA violations, and that they're getting very active and are about ready to roll out HIPAA audits. So that applies to everyone who has any HIPAA data. The states, 47 states in the United States have passed breach notification laws. The primary recipient of the notification are individuals whose PII has been compromised. Notification is not based on where the breach occurs, it's based on where the resident lives. That means if you're operating on the internet, you're going to have to comply with 47 different states' breach notification laws. They are similar, but they do have different criteria. So 15 states require that you notify governmental agencies, the attorney generals, that type of thing. 27 states require that you report to the National Credit Reporting. Tennessee, just this last month, passed new legislation revising their statute. Talk is this is going to become the standard. It's not the standard, but there are 3 key provisions that other states may very well follow. The first is that there's now a time frame in which to file the notification from the date of discovery of the breach. That's 45 days. That is a very short window for any company to discover the breach, discover whether it's actually a breach that requires notification, and then act. Secondly, it applies to not just unencrypted data, but encrypted data. So no matter what has been lost, you have to notify. And thirdly, this applies to whether the breach is because of external hackers or employee negligence. So this is what's being touted is going to be the industry standard, and many of the states may very well follow suit. Recent healthcare breaches. Anthem 1 and Anthem 2. First Anthem, there was the breach, and then there was a second breach, which is fascinating because there's a whole phishing scam that occurred after the fact. So 70 million people were affected. Excelis, 10.5. Primera, 11 million. And recently, again, just to emphasize the point, it's not just the big boys, it's the little guys, is that Hollywood Presbyterian just paid out $17,000 because of a ransomware. They paid it out just on February 5. So, and now they're being fined for payment for failing to take the appropriate steps. So now they're being investigated for that. Ted, let's talk a little bit about financial sector.
Sure. I mean, it comes as no surprise that the financial sector has the cyber criminals have their eye on them. You know, the old line when they asked Willie Sutton, why do you rob banks? Willie said, because that's where the money is. And that's why cyber criminals look at banks. Again, Chase, JP Morgan, BOA, Heartland, one of the largest payment processing breaches that has occurred. So yeah, if you're in the financial services industry, you know that you are a target. And what Beth was talking about, unlike Europe and many countries around the world where we have national data protection laws, we don't have that in the U.S. I mean, we have legislation in Congress right now that hasn't come out and hasn't been passed yet. But we're a country that has privacy laws and data security laws based on business sectors. The financial service industry has been heavily regulated, as it should be and needs to be, in order to protect that data. But it's just not the big guys that are experiencing these losses. My firm has small credit unions that are being subject to attacks because, again, the hackers know that these small federal credit unions are more vulnerable. They don't have the resources. They don't have the financial capabilities to put into place what they need to. And while they are certainly trying to adhere to Graham and the requirements, red flag laws and things like that, red flag rules, nevertheless, the financial sector will always have a great amount of focus by cyber criminals.
And I want to add one thing to this that many of you may have read recently over the last couple of months about the Bangladesh bank that was scammed into transferring $80 million.
It was $100 million.
Yeah, which they got some of it back. But in investigating that incident, it's been discovered that the system for World Interbank Financial Transfers, or SWIFT, has also been compromised. That there's evidence that hackers are actually working inside this banking communication system. Every bank in the world has a SWIFT code, which is part of how they route money to each other. That network is the hackers are into that network now. They are getting so intelligent. They are learning and understanding more and more about how banking systems work, which means that secondary or tertiary financial targets that play a role in this are also becoming targeted by hackers as they're getting more creative with how to get money out of the system.
Good.
So talk briefly, you were talking about the credit union.
Sure, and again, the screen in front of you is the PCI DS security code, or security standards, which vendors and people that take credit cards are required to adhere to in order to protect themselves and protect their customers. PCI is very specific, and a lot of times people refer to themselves as PCI compliant or PCI regulations. And oftentimes they're not. The bottom line is that the PCI standards are trying to maintain and protect the data for retailers who take credit cards and your credit cards.
The compliance with PCI regs is complex, to say the least.
Sure.
But it's not the same as security also.
Right.
Target was compliant with PCI, and yet they were hacked because do not mistake compliance requirements for adequate security.
Sure. John, a lot of folks out there that are on the commercial side that are law firms. We have a lot of lawyers listening who know little that have payment processors. How does insurance protect, if it does, people that are taking credit card and face PCI fines? Is there a place for that in coverage?
Yeah, you do have a place. That's under your fines and penalties coverage, and you got to look at your policy, because normally there will be a sublimit for that amount, as well as a possible supplement with regard to the crisis management, et cetera. But it's just part of the normal insurance grant today in the cyber world. And you got to look at, again, you got to look at cyber coverages like as a gap coverage. So it's filling in your traditional coverages, on that. But that is covered, as well as ransom. Ransom is covered.
And are we seeing, are you seeing sublimits for that type of exposure?
For the most part, we are. We don't. We believe that full policy limits, that can be exhausted, by one grant of coverage or not. But you're seeing most of the trend with the carriers are sublimits.
Flood of applications tomorrow with that comment. You can already say it's going to be transfers right over to Ridge Global.
So talk about the difference between first-party costs and third-party costs, because that has insurance implications as well.
Yeah, when you look at your first-party costs, it's really, when you look at it from a first-party side, your business interruption, which wouldn't be covered by a cyber attack because there's no tangible damage or loss that was caused. And then you're really looking at what do you want your cyber policy to do? It's, the reputational harm, getting you back online, and then you're looking at the forensic of it. What do I have? How many records have been compromised? What is the extent of the hack? Then, do I have, from a legal side, my notice requirement? And again, you're looking at mostly, you're seeing, costs. If you look at, the privacy credit monitoring or call center. That's, can be wrapped around depending on your grants of coverage under your crisis management. Your business interruption, very key, because you're down. You've been denied access to availability to work. Worst thing in a law firm, have everybody standing around because somebody's taking your software. It's taking your crown jewels, your work product. It's very important.
No emails. Can you imagine
No
today
emails.
working without
No.
emails?
But can we just have one day like that?
And then your public relations of it. How do you interact? Who's interacting with your clients and in the general public. Law firms, are in the public sector these days. And it was 2 or 3 weeks ago. They had some of the major law firms that were hacked. And it was, is that an extortion? Only a matter of time. So you're really looking at that is how do you get back online and back in business on your first party.
So on that note, though, I mean, that law firm that was breached, I mean, their crown jewel is their reputation. I mean, is that not true for almost every business?
It really is. The cyber policy is designed to respond on your behalf and to protect your reputation. And it's a matter of speed. That's what you're really looking for. It's a matter of speed to get you back to where you were pre-breached. And you see that across every industry sector. And especially with law firms, because they are containing, sometimes wealthy or, business clients that are in development. It's in research, R&D. It's a major exposure.
And we're not going to talk about it because it's a subject in and of itself, but law firms that are breached, you are subject to disciplinary hearings in your state for breach of confidentiality. And that is going to be a continuing and growing trend as lawyers and law firms become hacked.
So let's talk about cyber liability and third-party claims.
Sure. We're seeing a variety of cases coming in. There has not, in terms of causes of action, the causes of actions are breach of contract, negligence per se, consumer fraud, of course, privacy claims from the right to secrecy, appropriation of names, likenesses, placing someone in a false light, intrusion upon seclusion, which is basically the right to be left alone. We are seeing most of the cases today are in the class action and in the derivative shareholder actions. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the individual actions, which up to this point have been unsuccessful. I've had conversations with folks, and I think that's going to change. I think what you're going to see is an uptick in lawsuits against, and I know the brokers are all going to cringe here, I think insurance brokers, retail brokers, professional liability are the next big group of people that are going to be sued for their clients that have been hacked and they're going to be claimed that they weren't given the right information about the coverages that they needed and the amount of coverages that they needed. And I know Betsy's going to cringe, although she doesn't do the forensic side. I think the forensic firms are going to start seeing a lot of lawsuits. We've already seen one that's come in, and it's just going. I think there's a tidal wave on that. I think you're going to see businesses that are breached that are going to have insufficient limits to cover their losses, and they're going to be looking for some ways to cover those losses, and they're going to look to those forensic firms and say, you came in, you told us that we had the right security, we got breached, you're responsible. The PL world is about to, I think, be changed very dramatically with the tidal wave of litigation that I think is actually coming.
And Ted, what are you saying in terms of the courts, in terms of standing in general and injury requirement in order to?
Well, thank you for that segue.
Yes.
Thank you. John just served that.
I actually didn't know that was the.
Of course he did. He has it right in front of him. I assure you. But thank you for that softball. So when you look at what's going on in the courts today, it really is a testament to that we are in the beginning of this litigation. We are still fighting issues of standing. Clapper versus Amnesty International is perhaps the most famous case that talked about the need for actual injury in fact. There must be Article 3 injury. And now there is a case that was argued on November 4th in the Supreme Court. Called Spokio versus Robbins, which everybody is waiting for. It's a case involving a gentleman that had his information published by Spokio, which is an information sharing company. He was unemployed. He brought a lawsuit based on the violation of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, claiming that his information was incorrect in the internet. The case went through, and the Fourth Circuit found that, in fact, he did have standing. And the issue before the Supreme Court now is whether, in fact, an act of Congress conferring standing on a person for an injury and how that compares to Article 3 standing. The decision is not down yet. The passing of Justice Scalia has raised lots of issues as to how that's going to be decided. But folks that are in the privacy world and folks that are in this space are very interested to see what Spokio does and whether Spokio actually does open up the floodgates to individual litigation.
Talk about negligence and the standard of care.
Yeah, you know, at the end of the day, while there's a lot of, this is very glitzy and this seems very technical and very new to everybody, at the end of the day, we're going to be looking at negligence-based suits, and that is, has your company, has your insured maintained best practices? Are they doing what everybody else does? And it's going to be no different than the typical negligence cases that we're seeing today. Whether you're, you know, in an industry and you're designing a product, did you maintain the type of best practices and industry standards in the designing of that product, or did you maintain the floors on your commercial business in a manner which was reasonable? It's going to be about reasonableness. We often talk about negligence. We talk about best practices. Did your business employ best practices? Did you do the kinds of things that you need to do in order to protect yourself? The mere fact that you had a breach, unless it's a certain violation of a statute and you have a negligence per se claim, but generally, I mean, when these cases get to court, we're looking at the issue of, did you maintain best practices? It's not about insuring and being an insurer of data protection, because we know that that's not possible. What it is about is, did you put your head in your cyber sand, or did you go out and proactively try to protect the data and maintain the privacy of the records that's in your possession? And that's going to be done by looking at the steps that you took. Did you go out and hire a forensic firm to do endpoint testing? Did you hire Betsy to come in and do threat modeling and to look and scare the pants off you, like we might be doing?
So is there there's no national standard and there's no safe harbors, but what if you do promulgate some policies and procedures and they don't comply with it? What does that look like at trial if you do something like that?
Well, listen, it looks like whatever the jury thinks it looks like, right?
Right.
Depending on your jurisdiction. I mean, I think this is so new right now that nobody really knows what's going to happen. You know, but what's interesting is that this area is going to affect every single juror, because how many people's records have been breached and how many people have undergone identity theft and suffered, you know, everything that goes with it. So, you know, this is really, really scary stuff that businesses have to take very seriously. And the days of putting your head in the sand and saying, you know what, this is an IT problem. Well, this is not an IT problem. This is now in the C-suite, and this is up. And if you're a big company, you're dealing with your shareholders, and you're dealing with the members of your boards of directors are going to be exposed on D&O, and they're going to be and your business profits are going to take a hit. So this is everybody's problem. The day of passing the buck and saying, not my responsibility, it's an IT problem, not happening any longer.
Yeah, it's definitely a C-suite, problem that needs embracing, by the C-suite for that, cyber, what I call live risk management. The days of just passing the buck down to the IT department is over. It's not an IT problem. Absolutely correct.
And realize that that's one of the benefits of doing a comprehensive cyber risk analysis is that you can tell the story of how and why you made these choices, and being able to explain, we considered this, we chose this because of these reasons. That goes a long way to making your organization appear proactive and actively engaged. So the risk management process is actually sort of produces that extra benefit as well.
So a company undertakes a risk management, risk assessment, puts into place all types of procedures to protect against it. Are they safe? The answer is no. Why is that? Because you have third-party vendors. That's why. You are very often.
Can you say Target?
Yes, exactly. Target. The HVAC.
And they were compliant.
They were compliant, but they had an HVAC. It's fascinating. It's amazing to us, despite the sophistication of companies, that they have not vetted their vendors and have not tried to shift the risk to their vendors. And it can be a very costly mistake. I think Target's at $167 million now. So what can a company do? Where there is risk, there is also opportunity. And so if you have the bargaining power, you can shift the risk to your vendors. First, you should vet them carefully because they can be the weakest link. Whatever you're requiring your own company to comply with, you should be seeing what your vendors are doing as well in terms of data collection, privacy policies. Have there been any complaints? about the way they've handled their privacy data. And then there's the opportunity to shift the risk through contractual indemnifications, limitation of liabilities, breach response allocation. Who's responsible? If there's a breach and you discover it's your vendor, or as you as the data controller, you still own that liability, but you can shift the response allocation to them, the cost of responding to that to them if you have the bargaining power and actually do it. So the first thing is read your contracts, because what we've found is that actually, especially IT vendors, they try to shift the risk back to you. They'll perform all the work for you, but if there's a breach, it's your problem, and there may be a limitation of liability.
We just had that with a risk that we consulted with Ted and his firm on that had a limitation of liability to the value of the contract, and our risk that they wanted us to insure, and they had $1 million limit. And I'm like, and it was in the aggregate, eroding policy, and we were saying no, you have to have your vendor boost up the coverage. That it's a pass through because our client was outsourcing the whole IT platform.
Realize also with the vendors discussion, just as you have vendors that you want to scrutinize, so too you are also a vendor. So you also have relationships where you provide services where they can scrutinize you in the same way. So realize just as you become outraged at how lackadaisical your vendors are you also lackadaisical as a vendor to your clients as well? I mean, it works both ways.
So John, talk a little bit about additional insured requirements. Are you seeing an uptick in that at all?
We are, actually. We're seeing, especially in the core processing side. We have a lot of clients coming to us that are outsourcing their core functions. And that's one of our requirements of saying, okay, first of all, if the information could be published, what's your GL coverage? And what's your limit of the GL coverage? And then also, in terms of the insurance, what's the quality of the insurance, the limits? Is it eroding? Notification requirements to us as an additional named insured on the policy are some of the mandates that we're taking in to assess what is our overall cyber exposure for that given risk. So there is a tick up on that. We're seeing more and more counsel be involved, with the proactive brokers bringing to counsel, specialized counsel to the table, saying, look at this vendor contract, look at this limitation of liability. What about the additional named insured? It's not a certificate of insurance, believe it or not. Some people are still, accepting certificates of insurance, as we see as part of the, when they come to us, for cyber coverage. So it's something that we are definitely seeing a tick up is on the third party vendor contract interpretation by counsel seems like has upticked in the last 6 months.
Let's move on to traditional insurance coverages. So before we move to cyber coverage, as typically companies will have property and crime, commercial general liability, professional liability directors and officers. None of those policies may necessarily provide coverage, or there may be gaps. So we're going to drill down a little bit on the commercial general liability because that's where we've seen the most litigation. So.
Sure. So we are seeing folks, once a data breach occurs, attempting to seek coverage. Well, certainly if they have a cyber policy, but other areas that people are looking at is their CGL. Is there any coverage under coverage A? Generally, there isn't because, John, am I right? Most policies today are excluding electronic records under property.
Absolutely.
So
standard ISO exclusion.
Right. So we're seeing some. There's, I think, across the circuits, we're seeing that that people are saying no coverage under coverage A. Coverage B, which we're going to talk about, is a little bit different. I mean, the bottom line is that there is no uniformity in any of the decisions. We've got real splits across the circuits.
Yeah, we've been saying from an underwriting side, when we're looking at the coverage B, is the limits and what is the likelihood in a breach, would the records actually be published? So we're taking that into consideration when we're coming up with our rate for that given risk. And you're right, it's you've seen Connecticut with the Zurich decision saying no because there was no publication, and most recently there was one. Travelers.
Right. We're going to talk about that. Thank you, John, again.
Again, another segue. Good setup. And I think what John just said is really important. It is, when you're talking about under B, it is, you're really, really looking at publication being what courts are looking at as defining whether there's coverage or not. A case that just came down in April, which you see on your screen, is Travelers Indemnity versus Portal Health. And the site, by the way, is 35 F Sup 765. It is a Fourth Circuit case out of the Eastern District. In this particular case, consumers went on a website and found that their medical records were available online due to an unsecured server. Coverage was sought from travelers under coverage B. And in that particular case, coverage, in fact, was found for the duty to defend. And the court had looked at a couple of factors in order to make their decision. And the two major factors that they looked at was, number one, was there, in fact, an electronic publication? And two, was there unreasonable publicity or publication of material of a private nature? In that particular case, the court found that there, in fact, was, and ratified that there was, in fact, a duty to defend. Important case, one of the first cases that we're seeing like that.
So with the constriction around traditional policies, there's also opportunity now for people to get into the market with cyber policies. So John, I mean, you have some really innovative products, so why don't you tell us about what's available out there?
Pretty much as you see, regulatory fines and penalties and breach notification, they're your normal, grants of coverage. You're seeing, extortion, and ransom really starting to tick up. Especially, we've seen it tick up in the last couple of weeks on that. What kind of limit can I get? Here's what I currently have. It's on a sublimit basis. We're seeing on the law firms, we're offering a new product which we call our cyber law firm wrap. That we wrap around your professional liability in the event you have a disclaimer or a reservation of rights or an exhaustion of your limit by a cyber-related event. So there's a couple of the new things that you're starting to see come out, in the field.
So we've had quite a bit of discussion throughout about sublimits.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about sublimits and what you see in terms of trend. Do you think they're
Pretty much
eliminated, or they're going to be hard on?
Well, right now you're seeing a fair amount of sublimit with regard to crisis management,
Breach
notification, response, forensic response. I think as the market matures and as the retail broker side becomes more educated in terms of the exposure, that you're going to see more pressure upon the carriers to give the full limit out for all grants of coverage without any sublimits.
So I think we've seen a few times is that a company thinks they have the $1 million policy, then there's a breach, and they have 100,000, 250, and it wipes them out.
We have a risk that came in, same thing. It was with another carrier. They had a sublimit on forensic of $50,000, even though they had a $2 million limit. They had thought they had a $2 million limit with regard to the investigation of the breach. And it came to us, and said, hey, would you take a look at the policy? We need to get back up on business. And that claimed, right on point, the forensic was about $200,000, out of pocket. And that would give us the opportunity to take a look at the risk.
And that's why, it's so important to understand the data that you have and to understand what it is that you're protecting and how you're protecting it. Because if you have more records, if you have data, and you're not securing it and you're not insuring it in a correct manner, you're exposed, and that's where a lot of burden is going to be put on brokers that are selling these policies. They're not digging deep enough into their clients' data to find out what it is that they exactly have and what it is they exactly need in coverage.
Or worse yet, they're not even understanding the policy at all.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of brokers are selling cyber insurance. They don't know what they're selling.
Yeah, you go to one extreme to the other. We just had recently an account dealing with a very sophisticated broker talking about revenues, because that's one of our factors that we think in the rate. And it happened to be in the retail and the gasoline, because gasoline's up, it's about 10 to 11%. Forecast is up 30%. Is that a true change of revenue? Or is that just because they think? And we were able to come to terms with them to make a calculation, based on a floor. So you do get some, uneducated to the very sophisticated type of brokers, and that's, we're seeing that development, the broker community becoming very proactive, in terms of learning more about cyber and not just thinking it's a, quote, gap policy.
So we talked a lot today about breach and breach response. So Betsy, would you just go over quickly the stages of the breach response for us?
Sure. So you've been breached, and unfortunately for many firms, when they gather around the table and say, what do we do now? This is the first time they've ever thought through what a breach actually means for them. The good news is there are a great number of good sort of templates and protocols for breach response. The one that we're showing you on the screen right now is from NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is a government organization that has put together a best practices flow through the different stages of a breach incident. So the vertical columns are those stages: preparation, detection, analysis, flowing through containment to post-incident activity and reporting. Reporting is crucial. That's when you actually report out to the folks that want to know what happened. But the horizontal bars are all the different paths through these stages depending on the type of breach that it was. All breaches are different. I mean, what the extent of it, what happened, what systems were breached, how to bring the company back into functionality, what the reporting implications are. But even so, there are best practices for how to do that. And generally speaking, people, the more you get to the right, the more money you end up spending. And if you can focus on the left side, which is, again, preparation, getting your information, getting accurate information early on in the process is crucial to help you with your overall response. So this is kind of a busy chart, lots going on. This is one of several pieces of good guidance that are out there. I encourage legal counsel should be familiar with this stuff. The in-house counsel and the general counsel and counsel that's brought in should really be familiar with these best practices to help guide their clients through it.
And folks, particularly trial counsel, you're looking at a trial board in a negligence lawsuit, right?
Yeah.
When the suit comes in and the plaintiff counsel has your CEO or your chief information security officer on the stand, he's going to take that board and going to ask them, did you comply with NIST standards?
Did you even try to find out what they were? Did you even imagine that you could be breached?
Did you know what NIST was?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's not just, there are others, but the point is the information is out there. You can no longer say, I don't even know what there's lots of good guidance out there. You can't excuse yourself anymore by saying this is, there's no way to do this. There are many good ways to do this. It is actually a overwhelmingly a legal issue, and it should be a technical issue. So you need to bring all those folks together and work through it.
So Ted, talk about what's the first step in the preparedness.
Well, we've talked a lot about it today, and the first step is of course, understanding what your data is and bringing the right team in to assist you in protecting that data and assembling a team, making sure that your company, that is from the C-suite down to each individual employee, that they understand that everybody plays a part in data security and privacy. Again, it's just no longer an IT problem. Senior management has to be involved. If your company is large enough and you have a chief information security officer, there's got to be interface between those groups of people, human resources, and speaking with cyber counsel, and having cyber counsel really not only act as a quarterback at a breach response, but act as a quarterback proactively to ensure that you're ready and that you've maintained best practices. If you look at the next slide, we lay it out in sort of a framework for you. So this is selfless or self-promotion here, but Beth, one of the things that we do for businesses and with Betsy is we go in and help companies. And one of the first things that we do is conduct a cyber risk assessment, and that's from the forensic side, as John's saying, talking about looking at endpoints, looking about how you store your data. Are you keeping up to date with patches, and do you have the right software and security software in there? From counsel standpoint, helping companies develop internal cyber mitigation policies and best practices that are implemented and just not sitting in the file cabinet of an administrator, but actually looked at and used and tested. Conducting due diligence. We bring cyber teams in like Betsy, who not only does social engineering training with people, but also after the training is done, we want to see if it works. So we do deliberate hacking of our clients to make sure that what we taught them is in fact what they're implementing.
And who do we always find fails to understand or comply with the training?
Always the CEO, the person dictated. It's always the person at the top who's asking for these plans either isn't listening or they're on their iPhone during the training. And our fun is, well, we're giving away company secrets, so let's not tell because all our CEOs will be ready. We're helping companies looking at their evaluating their insurance coverage, which we talked a little bit about, establishing a breach plan and having a response team. The time to prepare for a breach is not once it's discovered, when your customers or your clients call you up and say, uh-oh. The time is now. The time is to decide who the shareholders are and who the stakeholders are in your company to ensure that when the breach occurs that you are ready, that you have an action plan, that you have the right vendors in place, that you're not at that point running out and finding out who's going to do your notification and who's going to do this and who's your crisis communication team, working with a great company like Ridge who has agreements with vendors. And most important, we talked about this, providing comprehensive employee training. The weakest link is with our employees not being well trained, not keeping their password on the bottom of keyboards and doing the right thing. And these are just some of the steps that companies across all sectors need to be doing now. And I use the term, taking your head out of the cyber sand and waking up to the realities of the risks that face you.
Ted, I was in Israel last week, and you actually saw the Israeli Defense Force do their first cyber drill. So there is an awareness. And so I look at this sketch. This is really your defense plan. Because, it's no longer just to have security. It's what is your defense plan? Because it's not a matter, if you're going to be breached. It's when and when you discover it.
Right.
And that's what I'm really saying. And when you look at the Israeli who's been in the forefront of this, that they actually doing a live cyber drill, attack drill. Just, to me, I just couldn't believe I read that in the paper. It was there.
So when a small company, is listening to this or looking at this list, that can be daunting. And I know we've talked, Betsy, about being practical and pragmatic about this and really looking at what's the data and what should they do. Just unpack that a little bit more.
Well, first of all, you're probably already doing a lot of things right. This whole cyber risk assessment, I think everyone's afraid it's going to be all bad news, where you're going to have to spend tens of thousands of dollars and we have everything. And I think the reality is, as a small business, you can compensate for your technical vulnerabilities with good human behavior and vice versa. Yeah. So there are a lot of options. The answer is not always spend a ton more money and completely tear out everything you have. The reality is understanding your business, what your threats are, what your risks are. Really, with hackers, you can't be perfect. You just have to be as good as the hackers are coming at you. So if you understand where you rack and stack in terms of the bad guys out there, you can sort of recalibrate your defenses that way. So it's seeing yourself accurately is the first step, and really getting a good handle on what your exposures are, and also giving yourself credit and finding creative ways to improve your security that don't have to be super expensive and cost intensive as well. Employee training is a key thing. People talk about employees as being sort of a huge security vulnerability and liability. Like, it's always your employees that are going to fail you. Well, actually, they're your best security resource. They are your first line of defense. They are your eyes and ears in the world. They are the ones behind the keyboard reacting to stuff. Empower them, engage them, inform them, build a healthy security culture. And you'd be surprised how many bad cyber attacks are halted by employees who are listening and paying attention, and because they knew it was possible. They have their eyes and ears open. That's security awareness, and it's actually, if you go at it as an interesting engagement challenge, not simply training, but let's look at the world and let's understand the role we play and what we can each do. It makes it more interesting for them and certainly more effective for the company. So again, for a small business, realize your people are a huge resource for you. And technology should support the business and support them and compensate where it needs to be. But really, people can be a tremendous resource.
And it starts at the top.
It does, absolutely. Security
Absolutely.
Culture, a healthy security culture begins with leadership making it a priority. I think as companies, we all say, we value our clients, we have the highest standards of ethics and behavior, excellent products, excellent value, excellent security should be right up there. It should be a core value for the company, and that sets the tone for everything that happens.
So we've talked a lot today about risk and a little bit fear-driven here, but where there's risk, there really is opportunity as well. That's what you're talking about, is you can leverage your employees, use them as a defense as well as a risk, right? So if you can, employee awareness, the lack of it is 35% exposure. So if you can eliminate that or reduce it, even for small companies, that's a significant change. And that Any final words? The one thing. You could say the one thing. What would it be?
Awareness.
I think I would go back to just say that, the threat is ever evolving. Be aware of the threat every day, every time you turn on your computer.
The information you need to be successful is there. The information is out there. You can do this. It just starts by looking at yourself as others see you first, and go from there.
We would again like to thank our speakers for today. Please contact Perrin Conferences if you'd like to reach out to the speakers directly with questions. At this time, I will be announcing the second and final CLE code. The final CLE code is Cyber 0428. Again, the final CLE code is Cyber 0428. We will email an evaluation to all registered attendees. Please include the 2 codes on the evaluation. This concludes the webinar for today.